Day 6, 1600 hours to 2000 hours. A red glow radiated from the depths of the shaft. They were up to 78% full power. The breakthrough would occur in 8 hours. The Chthons were waiting and praying. Chopra moved between them, calming their fractious nerves. He could sense an immense power enveloping the planet and knew his death was only hours away. The visions continued to haunt him. He had tried to sleep, but the horrific apparitions surfaced out of the recesses of his unconscious and frightened him. The shape-changer was inspecting the operation. Although he was pleased that they had managed to set everything up on time, he continued to mutter about the remaining android being alive, threatening them from somewhere on the planet. Chopra sensed the two women were together and within a kilometre of the castle. There was something else with them. He suspected that this was the artificial man. Although he told Swarf about the visitors, the shape-changer refused to listen to his worries about the Red Death. "It is the Empire that never ended," Chopra said. "You're still preaching death and destruction. Your people are so morbid. If the exploration of the galaxy had been left to the Chthons, we'd all still be living in caves," Swarf said. "And so we should," Chopra replied. That had been their perfect existence before the Empire builders had come in their tall ships. The universe was about to be plunged again into eternal darkness. The Chthons had known that the Earth colonists would one day reawaken the Elder Gods. They would come to this planet and open the gates of their imprisonment. Many Chthons were butchered when the Imperialists first arrived. As a race, they had prayed for death before the return of the monsters. The myths of their people told how the Elder Gods had broken through and laid waste to the cosmos. Only through the sacrifice of a distant people had the Old Ones been vanquished and order been returned to the universe. The Chthons had known that it was not over, and they waited, sheltering in their cave world for the storm to return. This was all a veil of illusion. Chopra wished he didn't possess the sight. The Imperialists carried on their day-to-day life, and he felt sorry for them. They did not understand, but theirs was a simpler existence. The pain hit him, all the way down his left side. He slipped onto the cold floor. He tried to breathe steadily, but the noises from upstairs disturbed him. Ghosts walked the castle and screamed out in panic. White figures glided overhead. They were trapped, screaming for help and mercy. He could see them in chains, walking in bloodied battle armour through the ancient corridors. And then the torture instruments, used by the servants of the Old Ones, tore off flesh, inflicted pain, and maimed their captives. Chopra wanted it to stop, but there was no escape from the strange visions haunting this place. The weird feasts, insane dancing, and animals copulating in the dirt. And the monsters. He let out a scream. The invisible cage imprisoned them. The doctor had rallied against the unseen forces which had abducted them, but to no avail. The travellers had been transported through the hole in time to their place of capture. They could see only darkness from the invisible bars of their prison. They were obviously in a dark room, but where in space or time was unknown. Blake lay on the floor of their cell. This provided a welcome relief from the constant travelling of the last 3 days. The doctor was less impressed. He was seething with anger. Blake tried to persuade him that there was little he could have done anyway, but the time traveller would not agree. He would have found some means of stopping the Yisgaroth. The poet suspected that the doctor was trying to deal with his confused thoughts about the past. The doctor would pace around, shaking his head, trying to say something that was stuck in his throat. "Why?" the doctor exploded. There was no response. The sunlight was deteriorating. It would be nightfall soon. Bernice shivered. She had been looking at the castle for the last hour. Perhaps it was here that ogres and giants used to lure their victims. As they approached the castle, they realized that the advance of the red weed was increasing in speed. Most of the surrounding marshland had fallen to the crippling infection. Thousands of the hunters flew in a hysterical dance over the ascending chaos. Behind her, there was just the stillness. She felt a coldness inside her, and did her best to remember the happy times of her childhood. She again remembered the fishing and the picnic, the events of her childhood that she could really call happy. She recognized the coldness inside her as also present inside the Doctor. The funny man who had found her on a distant planet and had treated her as a human being. He hadn't tried to get her drunk or rape her. He wandered the universe, searching for something. He called it truth and justice. In a rare moment of self-disclosure, he had talked about wanting to go up to God and ask, why? He hadn't explained whether he actually believed in the existence of God, or what he was going to seek the reason for in his meeting with the Almighty. She laughed to herself. Why was she on this distant planet, trying to discover how the Alphosian civilization was destroyed? The Doctor had offered her a journey to see some of the beautiful sights of the universe. She thought that someday she would settle down. There had to be an escape. Although Bernice had been dealt a few rough cards in her life, she still thought that there could be something better. She had coped, so far. They were now a kilometre from the castle. They were trying to sneak up and gain entry without being seen by the shape-changer. Thomas had a mission to destroy the missile and prevent the shape-changer from carrying out his criminal activities. Bernice saw a little creature run in front of them. It looked like a typewriter. But that was stupid. They continued to walk on through dried mud and stinging grasses. And then she saw the creature again. It appeared behind a clump of dead plants, ran over, and stopped 5 meters from them. Another smaller one appeared and shot past the stationary one, chattering madly to itself. Suddenly it saw them and also stopped. It retreated slowly. "What are they?" Bernice asked. "I don't know," Elle replied. Bernice moved over to the creatures. She held an arm out, saying she meant no harm. The creatures backed off. She stopped, waited, and continued towards them. The little one made a shrill noise and ran back into the desiccated bush. It tried to hide itself. Bernice approached the larger of the two. It was a typewriter and had a piece of paper sticking out of its back. The paper had writing on. "Bernice, this is the Doctor. Do not believe anything you see. You are in great danger. Remember the Alamo." She had been joined by her 2 travelling companions. She looked at them. "I thought he was dead," Thomas said. "Perhaps he is," said Elle. "No, he's very much alive," said Bernice. This made her a lot happier. Somewhere the Doctor was alive and watching out for her. She giggled and walked over to the other machine. The Doctor would have some answer to all of this. She peered at the smaller typewriter's message. "The other printer is not telling the truth. They are trying to deceive you, but you are safe at the moment. The Doctor." "Useful information," said Elle. Thomas picked up the larger typewriter. He stood on the smaller machine. It smashed, and machinery scattered over the ground. As the larger machine struggled, the android pulled it apart. Its legs continued to move, even when the body was removed. Thomas grunted that they had wasted enough time and must continue on their journey. He walked off. They were less than 1/4 of a kilometre from the castle. The slope up to the castle was winding and steep, and where they now stood was cast in shadows. Suddenly, Thomas put his finger to his mouth, beckoning the others to be quiet. He had heard something. There was a slight movement close to their position. Small, wizened men with parched skin and hairless bodies appeared around them. There were 6 of them. All carried small hand weapons. Thomas lunged at 2 of the enemy. Even with his injuries, he managed to connect with his targets. Both creatures collapsed with broken necks. Bernice threw herself at another of the creatures. The creature's weapon fired, but missed her. She threw a punch and hit the creature in the mouth. "What are they?" Bernice shouted. "Chthons," Thomas replied. "They are the native life form of the planet Trieste." "We've got a fight on our hands," said Bernice. Elle didn't move. She shouted at her companions, pointing towards the marshland. Bernice looked. Although there was a clear path from the space station to the castle, The Red Death was within meters of their position. It had enveloped the marshland. A creature lunged forward. Thomas moved, knocking it into the red weed. The creature staggered for a few seconds and turned to scream. There was no sound, and no more movement. It had petrified and been frozen in space and time. The other creatures screeched nervously, but they weren't running away. Above them, hunters swarmed in increasing numbers. They seemed to be laughing and mocking the battle going on below. "Give up! Just give up!" Elle shouted. "We've got to get inside the castle. We don't have time to stand and fight. Bernice, please!" Thomas stood still. He was controlling his body and was ready to explode and attack the Chthons. Bernice looked at him and shook her head. Elle was right. She moved over to the android and touched his arm. "We don't have a choice," she said. She walked towards the Chthons, putting her arms up. Elle followed. The Chthons were in control and waved their guns as if they had captured the travellers. Thomas shouted, "No!" However, there was no point, and he raised his arms in surrender, following his companions. They entered the castle. The dank corridors led to a courtyard. The 4 Chthons pushed them as if hurrying to return to safety behind the walls of the castle. The captive's hands were bound with thick metallic rope. Bernice could see Thomas trying to prise his hands apart, but his broken arm proved to be a burden. The shape-changer was waiting in the centre of the castle. A huge drill had been lowered into a shaft in the ground. The drill was screaming, and an intense heat was rising from deep inside the shaft. Chthons ran around, checking the operation and the equipment. The dwarf sat on the floor, guiding the operation. Swarf turned to face Bernice. He was snarling. "We meet again, and now you are here to witness my greatest triumph." Bernice looked around the medieval castle. Hideous gargoyles stared down from the corners of the room, and a clammy dampness seemed to cover the black walls. Swarf hobbled over. His body squelched as he moved. The Chthons held on to their prisoners. The shape-changer smiled. He spat as he talked. "Chopra, tell me what is in their minds." Another Chthon came forward. His gait was unsteady, and he seemed to have difficulty focusing on them. He moved over and stared into Bernice's eyes. She could feel a strange tugging, almost like an itch inside her head. The Chthon was trying to explore her thoughts. He moved along, apparently looking into her companions' minds. He coughed. "The darkness is taking over," Chopra said. "I read their minds. There is something terrible out there. The red weed. The paralysis that has crept over the planet. I sense it is within a kilometre of the castle. They surrendered because they were more frightened of what is out there than in here." The shape-changer walked over to Bernice and stood in front of her. His breath stank. "Put them in the dungeon." Thomas struggled. Chopra added, "This one will kill you. He is programmed to retrieve the missile and annihilate you." Swarf laughed. "It is already too late. The missile has been dismantled. Take them away." The Chthon looked strangely at Elle. Bernice wondered why, but she had other worries. The Chthon said, "But what about the red weed?" "We'll seal off the castle. We'll be safe in here." Bernice looked at the Chthon. He didn't believe the shape-changer. He nodded politely, but his whole body language indicated that he didn't agree. At that moment, Bernice was very afraid. It meant that the criminals were not in control. She had thought the shape-changer was in control of what was occurring on the planet, but it wasn't true. He thought that they could simply close the doors and everything would be all right. They were manhandled towards the mighty front door. The Chthons had been ordered to seal off the castle from the unknown forces. The door stood over 10 meters high and was made of a silvery metal. 3 Chthons pushed the door shut. The sound of the door being closed reverberated around the silent corridors of the castle. Bernice looked at her captors. They were frightened, and they were all trapped.